We've reached another point in our series where it might be a good time to interject an intermission video, an opportunity for you to learn something else outside of the scope of the class, and it would be fitting to where we're at in the series, getting ready to go into chapter 12 and talk about various signs. A lot of people will look to some of the imagery in chapter 12 as well as in 13 to try to predict when the end of the world is coming. And while I can't get into all of the details of what some of these predictions are, and some of them are extremely elaborate, I think this particular video by Dr. Shane Wood from Ozark can address a lot of the problems with these videos that you might find on YouTube or articles you might find online. So think about some of the things that Dr. Wood is going to talk about, and then we'll discuss them the next time we gather in our class. Thanks for following along.
If you take the Bible out of context, you can make the Bible say anything you want. And when it comes to the book of Revelation, we seem to do this all the time. And the key problem is we come to Revelation with rigid assumptions, assuming what the book is supposed to talk about, assuming different questions that Revelation must answer. Questions like, when will the world end? Or are we living in the last days? Or what will the rapture look like when it comes? We assume a list of questions that Revelation must answer because of our assumptions. And I don't know about you, but if you've ever been on the other end of an assumption from someone else, it can cause a little bit of pain and a lot of problems. I mean, for example, take my hair. Usually I'm put into one of three H categories, a hippie, homeless, or a heretic. One of the three is usually where it lands. But no one knows really the story. No one has an idea about what my wife or my daughter thinks about my hair, or why it is it even began to grow out to begin with. I'm not going to tell you now. The point is, assumptions can do a lot of pain and cause a lot of problems. Same thing when it comes to the book of Revelation. As a matter of fact, one of our big assumptions of the book of Revelation is that Revelation is a chronological, and what I mean by that is event by event, a sequence, chronological roadmap of the future. Now, every one of these words are important, a chronological roadmap of the future. And we'll break it down. What we assume is that Revelation is a sequence of events, chronology, moving event by event. But it's a roadmap. So like a GPS, we can figure out when these events are happening, and hopefully then we can use the map to figure out what the future will be. And this is how we normally approach Revelation. That is the sequence of events that unravels the future for those that can see the map clearly. Here's my question. What if Revelation doesn't want to be a roadmap of the future? I mean, what if Revelation wants to do something different? What if the questions that we come to Revelation are simply the wrong questions? Let's take this assumption and let's just look at the text. I mean, let's keep it in context by reading the context. Revelation chapter 6, verses 12 through 17. While you turn there, if you're able to, let me catch you up on what's happened so far. Revelation chapter 1, John the Apostle is on the island of Patmos, and the cosmic Christ appears to him. It's a magnificent scene, and Jesus says, listen, I have a message to tell the 7 churches of Asia Minor. Chapters 2 and 3, we get the 7 messages to the 7 churches of Asia Minor. Chapter 4, John is taken up into heaven where he sees these 24 elders. They're bowing down before the one on the throne, and 4 living creatures crying out, holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty, who was and is to come. Then in chapter 5, you see the one on the throne holding a scroll. And John begins to weep because the voice from heaven says, no one has been found worthy to open the scroll. And what John wants more than anything is a revelation from God. And then all of a sudden, an elder comes up beside John. He says, John, don't cry. Look, the Lion of the tribe of Judah. And John looks, and what does he see? He sees a lamb, slain, standing in the midst of the throne. And all of heaven erupts. Because the Lamb is not only worthy to break the scroll, the seals on the scroll, the Lamb is worthy to be worshipped in the same breath as the one on the throne. And then in chapter 6, the Lamb starts to break the seals. The first 4 seals are the first 4 horsemen. The 4 horsemen that you've heard so much about. The first horseman is the one that is bent on conquest. The second one is the one that comes and takes away peace. The third one destroys economies. And the fourth one brings death. And then the 5th seal happens in verse 9, where the souls of the martyrs under the altar in heaven cry out, how long until you avenge our blood? And God says, here's a t-shirt, wait a little longer, more of you need to die. Then comes verse 12. I watched, who's the I? Context says, John is the I. I, John, watched as he, the Lamb, opened the 6th seal. There was a great earthquake. The sun turned black like sackcloth made of goat hair, and the whole moon turned blood red. I knew it was in Revelation. I knew it. Even as a junior in high school, I knew it. Anyway, the whole moon turned blood red, and the stars in the sky fell to earth as figs drop from a fig tree when shaken by a strong wind. Now put on your science hats for a minute. I promise faith and science can coexist. We're okay. Put on your science hats for a minute. What would happen if one star fell to the earth? Like just one. I mean, if you can't guess, let me just tell you, the world is over. I mean, even the sun is an average-sized star, and over 1,000 Earths could go side by side. I mean, the Earth's pretty small compared to an average-sized star. But now notice in the text, it says stars fell from the sky. More than one. Listen, if the sun and the Earth collide, the sun will probably be okay. But the Earth, not so much. But if more than one star falls to the Earth, it'd be safe for us to look at this and say, oh, he's talking about the end of the world. But here's the problem for our assumption. Here's the problem. We're at the end of the world, and we're only in chapter 6. There's 16 more chapters to go, and our roadmap has already hit the end of the world. Let's keep reading. It just gets worse. The heavens receded like a scroll being rolled up, and every mountain and island was removed from its place. Let's stop right there. What would happen if every mountain and island was removed from its place? I mean, listen, wherever you're at on the climate change issue, the reality is if we have the ocean level raised just by a couple of inches, it could have devastating effects on our climate. Now let's just pretend that we take every mountain and island and we remove it from the earth. There's a lot of different words I could use to describe what that would be like. One of them would be inhospitable. Inhospitable for life. Life could not continue with every mountain and island removed. Now remember, we also have stars that have fallen. This is the end of the world, but we're in chapter 6. How's our roadmap doing? Let's keep reading, it gets worse. Then the kings of the earth, the princes, the generals, the rich and the mighty, and everyone else, both slave and free, hid in caves and among the rocks of the mountains. They called to the mountains and the rocks, fall on us and hide us from the face of him who sits on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb. For the great day of their wrath has come, and who can stand? Now put on your theology hats for a moment. What do we call the great day of God's wrath? Judgment Day. Judgment Day. But we're in chapter 6. If Revelation is supposed to be a chronological roadmap of the future that lays out these sequence of events that leads to the end of everything, then why do we end the world in chapter 6, verses 12 through 17? Guess what? They end the world again. The book of Revelation ends the world again in Revelation chapter 11, verses 15 and following. Let me catch you up on the context. Chapter 7 is the answer to the question in chapter 6. You see the 144,000, this great multitude in heaven, and there are the answers of the one, the who can stand. We'll talk about that later. Chapter 8 begins with the 7th seal broken and there's silence in heaven for about a half an hour, and then the trumpets unleash, and literally all hell breaks loose. I mean, the key is given to the abyss, hell is opened up, and there's crazy locust-like things coming out, and they're attacking people, and all this weird stuff is occurring. I told you, Revelation is weird, I get it. We'll get there later. But then in chapter 10, you see this mighty angel, and he's got one foot on the land and one foot on the sea, and he gives a little scroll to John, and he says, eat it. John does. He's like, oh, sweet in the mouth. Not so good on the stomach. Reminds me of Ezekiel. Then we see these two witnesses, and they look a lot like Jesus, where they die and they resurrect. And then comes verse 15 of chapter 11. The seventh angel sounded his trumpet, and there were loud voices in heaven which said, the kingdom of the world has become the kingdom of our Lord and of his Messiah, and he will reign forever and ever. And the 24 elders who were seated on the thrones before God fell on their faces and worshiped God, saying, we give thanks to you, Lord God Almighty, the one who is and who was. What's missing? Is to come. The one who is and who was. But there is no is to come. Why? Because God is there. He is present. And the rest of the text tells us what he's doing. Because you've taken your great power and you have begun to reign. The nations were angry and your wrath has come. The time has come for judging the dead. Here's the problem. We're in chapter 11, and the world has ended twice now. As a matter of fact, the world will end again in the book of Revelation in chapter 14. It'll end in chapter 16. It'll end in chapter 19, maybe twice, chapter 20, possibly twice, and 21. By my count, the book of Revelation comes to the end of the world around 7 times. But if you're trying to make a chronological roadmap of the future, and it keeps coming to the end of the world, maybe at a certain point you should stop and ask this question. Am I making Revelation do something it never wanted to do? I mean, maybe Revelation has bigger things to deal with than merely your questions. Let me give you another example of why this roadmap idea is so troublesome. Turn to Revelation chapter 12. Revelation chapter 12 begins in verse 1. It says, a great sign appeared in heaven. A woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and a crown of 12 stars on her head. She was pregnant and cried out in pain as she was about to give birth. Okay, so we begin this chapter with a pregnant woman, and she is screaming. Now, we can learn the identity of the woman on some level by figuring out who is the baby that she's about ready to give birth to, and that gets told to us in verse 5. Revelation chapter 12, verse 5 says, she gave birth to a son, a male child, who will rule all the nations with an iron scepter. Who is this? I mean, if you've read Psalm chapter 2 anytime recently, Psalm chapter 2 says this very phrase, the one that will rule the nations with an iron scepter. The Jews call him the Messiah, and Christians call him Jesus. So we have a woman that's pregnant, about ready to give birth to Jesus. Who is she? Listen, on some level, we can say we have Mary. And on some level, we can say we're back in Bethlehem. But it looks a little different. I mean, when you get to verse 3, you have to stop and say, wait a minute, when have I ever been to a nativity program that looked like this? Verse 3, then another sign appeared in heaven, an enormous red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 crowns on its heads. Its tail swept a third of the stars out of the sky and flung them to the earth. The dragon stood in front of the woman who was about to give birth so that it might eat her child the moment it was born. I mean, think about that if you're one of the parents and they're doing a true nativity scene. You're like, hey, my kid's the donkey. Hey, my kid's baby Jesus. My kid's the dragon looking to eat a baby. It gets a little awkward. About as awkward as, well, about 10 years ago, my wife made the mistake of giving me the responsibility at Christmas time of setting up our nativity scene. So I clear off the top of our, piano. I clear off the top. We have a big nativity scene. It's borderline life size, but not that big. I mean, baby Jesus looks like a preemie, but I mean, it looks really nice. So I set it all up. I'm very excited, very proud of it. And my wife comes around the corner and she says, "What is that?" And I was like, "What? What is what?" She's like, "What is that in the back?" I was like, "Babe, that's baby Jesus. Like, how can you not recognize baby Jesus?" She's like, "Not baby Jesus. What is that red dragon doing in the back of the nativity scene?" I was like, "Babe, Revelation 12. There is a red dragon in Bethlehem." Why? You see, Revelation's goal is to pull back the veil. That even in our moments of absolute peace, we cannot forget that there is a war that is raging around us. Even in our moments of absolute tranquility, we cannot forget that there is a lion prowling, looking to devour us. Even in Bethlehem, that silent night, that holy night, there was a dragon lurking to score something big for his team in the battle. But here's the question. Here's how this ties into this. If Revelation chapter 12 is the birth of Jesus, how does that help our roadmap of the future? I mean, the world has ended twice before Revelation 12. Are we really going to argue that the world ended twice before Jesus was born? On some level, we have to stop and we have to ask ourselves the question, is our assumptions matching up with what Revelation intends to be? Listen, if you take the Bible out of context, you can make the Bible say whatever you want. And frankly, you can make a lot of money doing it. But if you keep the Bible in context, all of a sudden, not only does it change our questions, not only does it challenge our assumptions, but it even reveals a completely different target than what we thought. You see, we assume that Revelation is trying to predict. That the goal of Revelation is to predict the future. This is the target of Revelation, to predict what is happening. But what if Revelation's target was way different? What if Revelation's target hit way closer to home? I mean, what if Revelation's target was this? What if Revelation's bigger goal, more than predicting the future, was to transform you into the body, into the hands and feet of Christ? One of the reasons why I think that we push Revelation off into the future is because we don't want to look into the mirror in our present and look at our brokenness and look at our sin and look at our disobedience. Listen, He's a good Father, and we'll see that in this text. He's a good Father. But He also wants you to become different. And I don't know about you, but for me, that's good news.